Making sure my mic is on. Okay. A truly wonderful midrash, as recalled by Rabbi Sandy Eisenberg Sasso, who I mentioned last night. She was the first Reconstructionist woman rabbi ordained. Her midrash, her interpretation, reflects on what words were actually spoken at Mount Sinai. The rabbis disagreed about whether God spoke the entire first commandment or just its first word. Rabbi Mendel of Rymanoff, a Hasidic teacher, asserted, what was said on Sinai was only the first letter of the first word of the first commandment. So what letter is that? That letter is Aleph. And it is silent. Or more precisely, it's the very beginning of a sound. In other words, what happened on Sinai was the very beginning of a conversation, the beginning of a story. And so in the beginning is kind of the Jewish way of saying, once upon a time. After all, God is cast as the very first storyteller. So starting to tell a story, taking that first breath of an aleph, is often just as important as the story itself. For the story which I'm about to share is a topic we don't usually talk about in public, nor do we realize how many of us share similar stories. So I'm imagining that aleph, that breath, that beginning of a story, of an important conversation. So I begin. In the beginning, once upon a time, Seth and I got married. Yes, we were well into our 30s, and we couldn't wait to start having children together. We spoke with our doctors, and we made sure everything was in order. We even went to our dentists because we were told that was really important. Not that we hadn't been going to our dentist before, but you know what I mean. We spoke with our doctors who recommended that we get Jewish genetic disease testing, and this is something I even recommend to all of my wedding couples. And I made sure that I got mine tested first to make sure I wasn't a carrier of anything important, and then Seth did his as well so that what we were carriers of didn't overlap. And once we were cleared, we did our thing for months and months and months. And at our ages, we were told to try for 6 months to a year and then return to the doctor for fertility testing. So you bet we did. First, we tried a cycle of an IUI, an intrauterine insemination. Just, a wee bit of help in case my eggs were hard to find. You needed directions or something. And lo and behold, I got pregnant. We were thrilled. We told everyone in our families. We went excitedly to the fertility doctor for the next few weeks. But we never reached the stage of a fetal heartbeat. It was considered a chemical miscarriage, a type of miscarriage which takes place so early on that most women never even know that they're pregnant. But we had known, and we were crushed. So another round of IUI was tried a few months later, and once again led to pregnancy. And my brother and my sister-in-law were pregnant at the same time. They were much further along, but we were so excited because that meant we were going to have babies really close together. And we made it to the heartbeat this time. We made it into the 3rd month. And we were looking forward to exiting that first trimester and taking that deep breath of having gotten to that point. But it was not to come. We miscarried at 10 and a half weeks. We found out the very next day after my brother and sister-in-law gave birth. How to tell my parents the day after they became grandparents for the first time. It was devastating. There were no words. What to do? So, I'm a rabbi, just in case you didn't know. It won't surprise you to hear that I found strength and reassurance in the stories of the Hebrew Bible. Hannah, for instance, whose story in the Bible we just heard Stu read so beautifully. She was a great source of comfort during this time. I really felt like she understood our pain, the desperation, the sorrow, the anger, the pleading with which she turned to God was echoed in our experience. As many of you know, I'm the eldest of 4 siblings. My father was one of 4 siblings. His father was one of 5 siblings. So I had just always assumed that I would have tons of babies. I mean, it's just what was done in my family. Plus, I had millennia of Jews pressuring me to be fruitful and multiply. Right? Because it's the very first mitzvah in the Torah, the very first one. And then I had at least 2 generations of Jews commanding me to have many babies because we had a responsibility to replace the Jews lost in the Holocaust. So it wasn't just my own internal yearning for a child, but tremendous external pressure on religious and cultural levels. And during this time of struggle and loss, of hope, and then disappointment, Seth and I felt so alone. We knew so few people who had gone through something similar because nobody talked about it. I only had 1 or 2 friends who were willing to say things out loud. And in our family circle, we had this wonderful first grandchild that was being celebrated, and we didn't want to do anything to overshadow that. And then, professionally, I kept all of this to myself, which was all right most of the time. You know when it got really hard? Brisses and baby namings. I worked so hard to build a wall around myself in those moments way back when so that I could remain professional and not let the sadness overwhelm me. Words like those in Unatana Tokef, who shall be born, broke my heart, for I felt it just wasn't meant to be for us. Yet, I prayed. I wished for a group, even of fellow clergy, who could understand how hard it was to do what I had to do. So the frustration over the silence these 8 years later is why I've chosen to discuss this out loud with you this morning. Speaking aloud words like infertility, miscarriage, pregnancy loss, and the like, take them out of the shadows and into the light. And all of us know someone close to us, if not ourselves, who has experienced these challenges. Not only do we know someone, but we human beings have been experiencing fertility issues and trying to understand them for thousands of years, if not longer. Our earliest matriarchs in the Torah struggled to become pregnant, and we use that strange word barren to describe their situation in all of our translations, but we really should call them infertile, because that we would understand even better. Because I would never call myself barren, but I believe I would connect with the experience of Sarah trying so hard to have a child with Abraham all the way until the age of 90. Oy, gewalt. Right? But if the text said that she struggled with infertility rather than that she was barren, Sarah's barrenness would mean so much more to me. Now, believe it or not, it's her barrenness that's the very first thing that we learn about her. The text says, now Sarai was barren, she had no child. That's Genesis 11:30. God appeared before Abraham and promised to be his shield and protector. So Abraham answered back, "O eternal God, what can you give me, seeing that I shall die childless? Since you've granted me no offspring, my steward will be my heir?" God answered back, "No, that one will not be your heir. None but your very own issue shall be your heir." So Abraham got to hear it straight from God, Sarah not so much. Many years go by, and still he and Sarah fail to conceive. And I can only imagine how difficult this must have been. We know that at least 10 years go by after they moved to the land of Canaan. And Sarah felt such a great sense of despair that what does she do? Many of you know, she gives her handmaiden Hagar to Abraham, with whom he could conceive. She says, "Consort with my maid, perhaps I shall have a son through her." Hagar very quickly becomes pregnant, and the son that she gives birth to is named Ishmael. Hagar winds up looking down on Sarah because she was able to become pregnant so quickly and Sarah was not. And it will still be another 13 years before Sarah finally becomes pregnant with Isaac. In the next generation, Isaac's wife, Rebekah, also has trouble conceiving. Isaac and Rebekah marry when Isaac is 40, and he's not a father until age 60, 20 years they try. It took them 20 years to have children. As it says in Genesis chapter 25, we read that Isaac pleaded with the Eternal in the presence of his wife because she was barren. And the Eternal responded to his plea, and his wife Rebekah conceived. So he's the one who went to God, and she was heard by God and conceived. And who does she give birth to? The twins, Esau and Jacob. Then a third generation of infertility takes place. Jacob and his wives Leah and Rachel encounter a very sad situation. Leah, who Jacob marries first, is the unloved wife. Oy to be her. She's the older sister of Rachel, yet she's super fertile. She gives Jacob 6 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, and 1 daughter, Dinah. Rachel, who Jacob really loves, is unable to conceive for quite some time. Rachel even cried out at one point to Jacob, "Give me children or I shall die." And folks in the midst of fertility journeys can certainly relate to that kind of thinking. They're very real words from thousands of years ago. In the meantime, Jacob also conceives with 2 concubines, Bilhah and Zilpah, who produce Dan and Naphtali and Gad and Asher. Finally, Rachel has 2 sons, Joseph of Technicolor Dreamcoat, wonderfulness, and Benjamin, though she dies in childbirth with him. Even today, in modern Israel, and some of you may have experienced this, when you visit the Western Wall, people will offer you, for a donation of tzedakah, red string, which has supposedly been wrapped 7 times all the way around the tomb of Rachel in Bethlehem. And if you wear it around your wrist, it has magical fertility properties, which have been passed along all the way from Rachel. No one knows exactly when this tradition developed, but, hey, a little tzedakah, a little fertility blessing. Now, one must wonder why. You're probably wondering why. I know I was. Why are they all dealing with infertility? Why is this such a big theme in the Torah? Why is our origin story written this way? I think we're meant to understand that the power to create still lies in God's hands. That may not be what we believe, but that seems to be what the story is saying. It's up to God in the story whether or not you're allowed to become pregnant and give birth. It could be some kind of reward or punishment. It could be part of a longer narrative. And the image of the barren woman appears many times throughout the Bible, most often as a form of punishment. God will give this kind of punishment for not following God's commandments. And likewise, we're told that if you do follow God's commandments, that there will never ever be a barren man or woman ever again in the land. So this type of reward and punishment system is so disturbing to me, and big surprise, did nothing to console me when I was going through all of this infertility stuff. I did not want to have to wonder, what did I do wrong, and for what am I being punished? Can you imagine having to think that way? But I'm sure it's hard not to. And then on to dear Hannah, whose story we read. We read it today on Rosh Hashanah, the day which celebrates the creation of the world, the birthday of the world. We're left merely to imagine the ways that Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel and Leah might have prayed to God, but we actually know what Hannah said. We get it written and dictated in the story. Let's remember the story. Hannah was the beloved wife of Elkanah. She suffered twofold. First, the sadness of her own infertility, and then Peninnah's taunting. Really nice, real good. And Peninnah not only taunts her, but is just really very fertile and keeps getting pregnant. Her husband Elkanah keeps trying to comfort her along the way, telling her that his love is matched by the blessing, is just as good as 10 children. But this did nothing to console her. Well, the time came for the family's annual pilgrimage to the local holy place in Shiloh. There, Hannah approached God, which is a very brave and chutzpahdik thing for anyone, especially a woman, to do. And she said this, If you will look upon the heartache of your humble servant and remember me and not forget me, if you will give me a child, I will dedicate him to the eternal all the days of his life. And though we read these words, it says that she keeps praying. So the rabbis of the ancient texts knew, what did she keep praying? And they came up with words of what else she said. They wrote a terrific midrash, a great interpretation, answering their own question, where Hannah tries to outwit God. She comes up with a brilliant logic. So according to the rabbis, Hannah's prayer continues thusly. God of all creation, you've made the angels above and the humans below. Angels do not eat, do not sleep, do not bear children, and do not die. Women eat, sleep, bear children, and die. If I'm an angel, let me live forever. But if I am a woman, let me bear a child. Okay, that's attempt number one. Then, dear God, you created everything in a woman's body for a purpose. Our eyes you made for seeing, our ears for hearing, our noses for smelling, our mouths for eating and speaking, our hands for working. And you have made our breasts for nursing. Yet what good are my breasts, God? Give me a child so that I may nurse with them. Rabbi Nina Beth Cardin, in her book Tears of Sorrow, Seeds of Hope, writes, she spoke about barrenness, arguing that it is an assault not just against her, but against the very elegance of God's worldly design. Hannah is depicted as bold and clever. To give Hannah a child, then, is not merely to heal one woman, but to heal the world. So the Midrash imagines one more appeal from Hannah. Ribbono shel olam, master of the universe, you have hosts upon hosts of creatures in your world. Is it so hard to give me one child? It's like an earthly king who makes a feast for his servants. A man comes by, poor and hungry, and asks the servants for one piece of bread, and they ignore him. So the man goes to the king and says, Your Majesty, with all the food you have, you cannot spare one slice of bread? The rabbis seem to imagine Hannah becoming frustrated, which I quite like. A dear friend of mine named Jacqueline Novat shared her own anger in a Devar Torah about Hannah. She wrote, I studied the rabbi's discussion of the story of Hannah in the Talmud with a friend. Several things stood out for me, things I wish I had known during our struggle. First, they say that Hannah got angry at God. She prayed against God rather than to God. She reproached God. Why did you give me breasts if I cannot use them to nurse a child? Seeing Hannah get angry at God made me feel a little bit better about my own reaction. As I saw others around me conceive, as I started to attend second birthday parties of children who weren't born yet when we started trying, as I saw more and more shows like 16 and Pregnant and Teen Mom, I was angry at God, but maybe that's okay. What I really love about the centuries-old interpretations of the rabbis is that they also imply that the male rabbis know the pain of infertility in their own lives, and they're sensitive to it. Because, of course, the grief is felt by parents of any gender trying to conceive. The rabbis of the Midrash and the Talmud so admired Hannah's prayer in the Bible that they made it the template for some of the most important prayers of our daily lives, the Shmoneh Esrei, the prayers that make up the tefillah, the 18 benedictions in the middle on weekdays. Now, most, if not all of you know that, like Hannah, Seth's and my story has a happy ending. It took us a little while to get there. We wound up going through a round of IVF, in vitro fertilization. The huge, intensive process of blood work and shots and all of the craziness yielded one embryo. One for implantation. Only one. And our 7-year-old son, Spencer, is here, our precious gift. And one day when he's old enough, we'll tell him the story of how precious he truly is to us. The heartache, the waiting, the bated breath, the paranoia, the joy, the jubilation, the celebration, the terror, the thought that anything could go wrong at any time, the pleading with God, all of that is reflected in the text with Hannah. How incredible. And it's so real for so many individuals going through that journey. So I hope that you'll encourage people in your life to speak that first aleph, that start the conversation. Let people tell stories. Tell your own stories. So that people don't feel so alone along the way. And maybe, just maybe, we'll be a part of reducing the stigma, reducing the loneliness, and help everyone see that each step of the path is just as holy as the next. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will. Amen. Amen.
Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu B'yam echad Yisrael U'tefilatam B'yahava Tikabel Tamid avodat Yisrael Yisrael Amecha Korea Pnei Lavadecha V'chan